Okay, so welcome to this second session of the series. Uh, so before picking up from where we left, just barely touching on that sutra, I want to correct myself about what I said yesterday in one of the comments regarding scientists. I kind of made a generalized statement saying scientists do not do this. Oh, that is very wrong. These days, scientists, there are many, and there must have been many even in the past also. There are many who not only are interested in meditation, but have pursued meditation for years and years, maybe much more than I personally do. And who knows what level of attainment they may have attained. So that's what one thing I wanted to correct. I kind of made a general statement saying, "Oh, scientists do not have shamatha." No, that was wrong on my part. But at the same time, even if scientists are pursuing researches and whatnot, and that may include even academics also pursuing in the studies of Buddhism and whatnot, they may personally have all those qualities and have no question, no problem in allowing the metaphysical world, the mystical experiences and whatnot. But they would be constrained to bring them into their academic world to make sense, because they kind of follow certain rules and regulations that would be acceptable to the general community. And so is the case with scientists, also have to be kind of measured and replicated through experiments wherever permissible and uh, possible. So that's how there's always this constriction in their way of making a scientific stand or an academic, modern day academic stand on any one of these aspects of Buddhism. So that's what I wanted to uh, correct myself on. Okay, so then before I start from where we left yesterday, I wanted to make some general statements about tupta, because we had all we covered yesterday by way of the background was in terms of when this genre as tupta might have originated, whether this was just something that the Tibetans invented, or was it something that they kind of inherited from their Indian sources, Nalanda University. So we saw in historical context how not only the mention of the four tenet schools was found, at least considerably very, very, very old sources, if not during the time of Buddha himself. Although one could also argue for that, because he he's universally accepted as having turned the 3 rounds of Dhamma wheel, and at least from the Sanskrit point of view, Sanskrit tradition perspective. The second was on Prajna Paramita, where he dwelled on the main theme of the Madhyamika school. And then upon request, as a follow-up to that teaching, he provided, if you will, an alternative way of looking at what he had said in the second Dhamma teaching. Not quite, what do you call, rejecting altogether, but saying this is another way of saying for those who may resonate with it and had difficulty with the previous presentation. So that's how, at least, even in his very time, the main thrust of the Chittamatra team, Chittamatra school positions and that of the Madhyamika school's positions were, in our terms, kind of made public, at least in that relative sense. Sources-wise, it goes far back in time, very arguably during the time of Buddha himself. And who knows, he may have already designed it that way, because maybe you recall His Holiness the Dalai Lama commenting on what we as Sanskrit tradition holders understand to be the first stanza that Buddha uttered soon upon becoming enlightened. Which somewhat runs like this. Yeah. If you want me to share this, okay, this may be good to do. Yeah, this is a direct quote from His Holiness's website in one of the teachings. Here it says, His Holiness mentioned the words, no, not this one. Yeah, so here, sorry. After Buddha attained enlightenment, he declared this: profound peace and peaceful, free from complexity, uncompounded luminosity. I found a nectar like Dharma. Yet if I were to teach it, no one would understand. So I shall remain silent here in the forest. So, and then in the following description, it says, we can understand the words profound and peaceful refer to the first round of the Buddha's teaching. That is the first turning of the wheel. And then free from complexity indicates the perfection of wisdom of the second round. Sabshi Tode. Here in English, when you say free from complexity, we may think like, no, this is too complex. It is not free from complexity. But the Tibetan term is Tode, free from exaggeration, free from fabrication, free from, one of the words is fabulations, free from fabrication. So not so much complexity. At least for many, the Madhyamika position is very complex. So it will be farther than, nothing can be farther from truth to call it free from complexity. But here, the Tibetan term is Chodel. Usually it is translated as free from elaborations, free from exaggerated, fabricated elaborations extending into projecting inherent existence. So he says, the second yeah, so free from complexity indicates the perfection of wisdom. That is the second round, second turning of the wheel. Uncompounded luminosity. Luminosity, in the sense not of uncompounded as in being permanent, but uncompounded as in being not temporarily created, something that has no beginning of a creation, no sight of an end, uncreated, unborn in that respect. But by its very nature, it is produced and it momentarily changes, but one could not trace an origin to that luminosity. So in that respect, so he says that reference to the uncompounded luminosity back then upon enlightenment, what he was referring to was planning on giving the third round of teaching, especially on Buddha nature, Tathagata Garva Sutra, and other related sutras. So, so it is quite I mean, at least from this interpretation, it is quite possible that Buddha may have already planned it, and thus, and then may have already intended it and implicitly allowed for that kind of a openness in interpreting it four ways. Usually we say the first is wheel of Dharma, where he presented the four noble truths and didn't necessarily explicitly take a stand on whether the status quo, at least to the ordinary beings, is the right or wrong. He just said four noble truths. It's almost like bring in these four new gadgets in terms of understanding your existence, and then this can make a difference. Not quite going into the complexity of really questioning how things exist and how correctly or incorrectly we may be viewing things, what's the area we need to be paying more attention. He kind of brought in new ways of thinking, kind of almost like a new gadget. Sometimes I call it new gadget, new things to kind of engage ourselves with, and that provides at least a new way of thinking, a new thing to do, to engage with, and that may inch us towards more awakening. Yeah, so we dealt with the historical aspect of it. But now the question is, allowing that, yes, that was explicitly, implicitly, kind of even present then, how would we make a sense of which is the higher school, which is the lower school, and then in between, what to do with those two schools? How do we arrange them like that? So that's the whole question to be asked. And so if we were to just merely listen to the exponents, the upholders of each of the schools, each one would claim themselves to be the middle way, right? Free from extremes. Nobody would, as I said yesterday, tenet, by very nature, when somebody comes up with a tenet, they tend to be tenacious about them. And if they do that with reasoning, understanding, whatnot, and that is the proper way of dealing, proper way of having a tenet and using it and engaging with it. But if one becomes tenacious with one's tenets, the so-called tenet, out of mere attachment and whatnot, then it could be even more blinding rather than enlightening. But suppose that these schools, each one of them based, as they claim, on reasonings as well as on scriptural sources in terms of what they hold on to as their tenets, they kind of do that with that kind of a sincerity, ideally, where they find that to be at least the right position to be in at that given stage. Of course, still open to improving, open to moving forward. And I think in ancient India, that kind of approach to anything spiritual seemed to be very prevalent and very much in fashion. So much so that people were very open to exchanging dharma. I don't think, yeah, exchanging dharma, kind of moving to different folds in accordance with where their, if you will, where their heart is in terms of their awakening, like that. But being very sincere. That's how one's approach to the dharma should be. Always making sure that what one holds as one's dharma, as one's spiritual practice, keeps one from more troubles, keeps one away from more troubles, and more particularly the trouble-making afflictions within oneself. And then in that regard, whatever seems to be more powerful, more potential, one should be open to uphold that, to the extent of even changing sides, if you will. It is very difficult to change aisles, but back then changing sides beyond aisles is uh, very much in fashion, very much accepted. So if we were to just merely listen to each of the upholders and then ask, which school do you think is the best? And say, oh, mine is the best. It is the middle way. All the rest falls in the extremes, right? So that would be difficult. And then another thing is we may say, oh, maybe the order of the schools may have to be based on what Buddha might have shared with us in terms of who to listen to. Then that would be difficult, right? At least with regard to Madhyamika and the mind-only school, Buddha had prophesied the coming of Nagarjuna and Asanga, Arya Asanga, in terms of how they would be very influential in reviving these two trends, if you will, of philosophical leaning within Buddhism. And he kind of welcomed them, he kind of prophesied them, and kind of lauded them, etc. So who do you listen to of the two? At least among the four, these two have been even prophesied by the Buddha. And then if one says that maybe irrespective of what their other positions may be, but the main important thing is the whole project, the whole enterprise of tenet system and the whole enterprise of Dharma practice, and more so within a Buddhist context, is to address the afflictions, to address the sources of problems in the afflictions. And there, whoever does the best job in really getting into the hard core of it and to the very bottom of it, and kind of makes the prospect of totally eliminating them kind of seem feasible, that would be the one to go for. So in that regard, let's see who has the best understanding in that regard. And maybe in a Buddhist context, because upholding the existence of a totally separate self, separate from the body, share, and what do you call, enjoying, if you will, or having totally different characteristics diametrically opposed to the body aggregates, would be no option, because that has already been blocked by Buddha by saying, by putting his stamp philosophically, it should remain within this. In a way, he kind of made our work more easy to choose, at least for the Buddhist followers. He said, yes, right from the very beginning, let that not be an option to look for. Start from no self. And then within that, see how far you can go, how good a job you can do. So one would have to look into how profound, how convincing, reasonable their position on no self is. Right? How profound, how seemingly convincing, how seemingly effective, more particularly effective in the actual experience is their take on non-self. But for that, one has to have quite a good handle on these understandings in the first place, and then be able to make the sorting, make the choice. But that's not usually the privilege that most of us have. Usually, when it comes to view, when it comes to presenting the view, I keep seeing a You can hear me clearly, right? Okay. Yeah. I keep saying, okay, that's fine. Uh, Pop up, but that's for me. Okay. So, so usually when it comes to view, it is very difficult to really use our full intellect and be very smart in making the choices, let alone view. Choosing insurance is very difficult. There are so many options of insurances. I'm totally confused. I just leave it to somebody else to decide what insurance would be good for me, and then just stay put for that years and years and years on end. Luckily, I didn't have to use it. Then I will come to know at least what the one I was having was good or not. Otherwise, I have no experience. Luckily, with the car also, with the life insurance, no problem with me. I just paying. I just keep paying. I don't have to utilize it. Actually, I usually say we should be doing the same thing in terms of investing for next life. Our insurance do not go beyond that. And in terms of the beyond RAM insurance, it's in our hand. We should be the one. We should be the CEO to decide how much to invest in all of that. Anyway, so when it comes to view, it is so difficult to make an informed choice. So that's also not a feasible option, although it sounds good option to kind of really use as a measure to see which one of the schools is the best and which one, etc., etc. So it is very difficult unless, except for following our teacher saying which is the best. Okay, I follow this. And yes, I think given the situation of how it is difficult for sentient beings to choose on their own, many teachers in the past have also volunteered in really sharing that information. I particularly remember George Atisha's statement where he says when it comes to views, yeah, he would list few masters, beginning with Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Buddhapalita, and others, and leave out some of the big names to make the work easy for us, at least for those who rely on him. So what else could they do, right? Because we ourselves not that capable of making an informed choice. And then if we were to kind of base our choice on just select topics, saying what is their position on this, what is their position on this, then that will mislead us. Because there are some positions that the Vaibhashikas uphold, that the Chittamatras deny, but ultimately, at least from the Madhyamika point of view, that turns out to be the right choice, and that the Vaibhashikas are on the right side and Chittamatra on the wrong side, right? I'm particularly speaking of Chidun, the external reality. Somehow Vaibhashikas, right from the very beginning, accept external reality, external to the consciousness, whereas Chittamatra, proposing as they are the mind-only position, they deny anything external to the mind. Everything is mental projection, or everything kind of comes within the mental fold, and go to the extent of denying any externality to anything. Whereas Madhyamikas, the Prasangika Madhyamikas in particular, accept that. And likewise, there are other such positions that if one were to kind of merely based on, I think this is quite telling. Some people may do that in choosing their insurance also. They may just look for one thing and they say, okay, it provides this, it must be good. Then they leave out the whole other picture and then feel completely disillusioned later on. And usually the insurance companies and all of the money-making companies do that. They would kind of almost hold out something interesting in front of us. Say, see, this is what I provide. Come, 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 right? So we may get carried away by it. So likewise, in the choice of tenets also, this could happen. So that's again no choice. That again no option. So what do we do? So given this situation, one of the masters in the past who has dealt with this topic, Gungdang Tembe Drime, he proposes one. By the way, I'm basing my presentation mainly on his text, where he in a very innovative way deals with this topic of tenet from this perspective of how to make sense of this and how to kind of validate the decision, validate the understanding that there is this set order in the hierarchy, and how that makes sense, how that ought to be the way it is, and how that is not a sign of contradiction or not a sign of weakness, but rather of strength. Very often, let me digress here a little bit. Very often people speak of contradictions in Buddhism. I even heard of conferences on that. And yeah, I asked for papers from those conferences. There may be many others, but haven't had the opportunity to really read those articles yet, but I have them in store. I was thinking of going. So usually it happens when somebody out of the blue takes one position of one school and then says, this is the Buddhist position. Or somebody would say, this is what Buddhists say here, and what is this? What they say in this school, see, and now pit them against each other and say, this is contradictory. Now it doesn't lead to anywhere. And likewise, if one were to find the entire answer within one school, that would be again not successful, because they may make a claim in the right direction, but may not right away have accommodated the full, thorough reasoning or rationale behind that, which you may find later on in other higher schools. So, and then likewise, there's this what do you call degree of advancement between sutra and tantra also. Not so much in the in what I called yesterday objective view, not so much in terms of the understanding of the ultimate reality or the understanding of the ultimate mode of existence of things, but in terms of what extra additional elements could be brought in to kind of integrate with that understanding, and thus augment, increase the effectiveness of that particular practice, and make a huge impact on the overall progress of one's spiritual journey. So likewise, you see that allowance there, that room that was kind of almost one could say designed from the very beginning, and the room for that was kind of provided for from the very beginning. So in that respect, what he proposes is to see the schools as a whole, to see each school as a whole in terms of their position, their take on the entire spectrum of the presentation, be that from the perspective of, be that in terms of what is the base, what is the ground reality, what is the path, what is the result, right? Uh, and 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 thus try to have a what do you call a composite understanding uh, of 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 their philosophy, and then compare it with the other. If one is willing to, if one is wondering, or maybe in one's practice one kind of falls, something is amiss, something is missing, whatnot, then try to kind of look into the other, and then try to again look into the other, not just picking on that particular topic, but then kind of for on the general understanding of it, in terms of where there's contradiction between the two, where there's not, and why that contradiction, what good comes from that difference, etc., etc. So kind of, and that's exactly what is supposed to be seen, what is supposed to be observed uh, between these schools. It's almost like looking at a child grow from infant to adulthood, right? Uh, where the growth kind of takes place in all over the body, all over his mind, all over his being, not just one part of his body, one part of his mind, but it kind of is an overall growth. There is a maturity, sensitivity, maturity that could be seen in the overall being itself. So that's how one has to be able to see them. And then on that basis, see what level is more mature, what level is connected, more connected with the reality. So not so much in the sense of kind of contradicting them against each other, but rather see the so-called lower tenets as the lower rungs of the ladder leading up to the higher, or as a as a uh, as a sequence of stages of advancement, of maturity. So it is in that respect that one could, even at this very stage of not being so fortunate in having all those sophistications of view, understanding, kind of a general bird's eye view of things, but one could do a good job in making sense of that. In these days, it is not so much a concern, because very often we start out with the Madhyamika school. Right from the very beginning, we are told of these four, Madhyamika is the best. Who would not go for the best, irrespective of whether that resonates with oneself or not, and might even begin to kind of look down at the lower schools and kind of criticize them, where one may not have actually seen the benefit, or seen the rationalities behind their positions, and how they are like an indispensable, unavoidable kind of a support to strengthen one's understanding of the school that one is trying to associate with. So it is not so much about pitting one school against the other, and the proponents of one school kind of really criticizing with a sense of antagonism. Sometimes people tend to think along those lines. That's just projecting our own what do you call, our own weakness on anything that we land our hand on anything that we place our mind on. So that's what is proposed, and then in that respect, from this tool, using this tool, we can even see how the apparent luck, if you will, apparent luck on the part of a lower school in choosing one position on a particular topic still falls short of a maturity on their part in choosing that position. Rather, it is almost like a sheer luck in choosing that option, but really not having the grounding to support that. Whereas in the case of a higher, say, Chittamata's position, let me give you an example. Take the existence of external reality as a question. The Vaibhashikas accept that, the Chittamatras do not. So I think Vaibhashika, Sautantrika, both of them accept that, and then the Chittamatras do not. Whereas Madhyamika, within that, the Prasangika Madhyamika accepts that. Now, on the surface, it would look like the Vaibhashikas and the Sautantrikas are smarter in this than the Chittamatras, or more mature in making the choice, or in making that move. But if we look closely, what their choice of the existence of external reality is grounded on, then we'll begin to see, then we'll begin to expose their weakness. They say, yes, external, I have no problem accepting external reality because everything has to have an objective external reference point, beginning point, starting point, external there. In the case of the external things, amounting to accepting atomism, like there is an external indivisible foundation there. In the case of the mind, saying there has to be ultimately an indivisible, temporarily indivisible mental event there to serve as the foundation upon which you build up the complexity. That's what their external acceptance of external reality is founded on, which is very, very crude. Oh, maybe in terms of Chidun, maybe in terms of external reality, I don't think Sautantrikas fall in that category of accepting indivisible atom. Chittamatras, both of them. But anyway, in the case of Vaibhashika, that's what their acceptance of external reality is founded on, which is very, very crude. Almost like going completely diametrically opposite to the Prasangika Madhyamikas. It's almost like going to the other extreme of saying there is a ultimate reality, objective ultimate reality. Whereas Chittamatras, when they propose that there is no external reality, the reason behind that is they say, they kind of point to, kind of inching towards the Madhyamika position, closer, then further, which is the case with the Vaibhashikas. By proposing that things do not have an external reality, and they are more dependent on the mind, although to the mind they still uphold objective reality, but nonetheless, this is like moving towards eventual kind of questioning of the way things exist, bringing us closer to understanding the Madhyamika view of a mere designation. So even on those aspects, one could see flavors of maturity in the so-called higher schools. So likewise, one could apply that. It would be good to use this tool in judging, in probing different aspects of a tenet school's position, and juxtapose that with that of the others, and begin to explore what the significance for that is, how that is a sign of maturity, or at the very least, not a sign of being less smart, etc., in the course of your study of the tenet system. and for, yeah. So so that's the criteria used to make sense of this hierarchy. So not so much in the sense of my position against your position, but more in the sense of growth in an individual. One could start from somewhere where one may already find comfortable, and then not necessarily from the very start, or may just start out from the very, very top. That's where one may have already been prepared for. Say from a Buddhist perspective, from previous trainings, from previous practices. But nonetheless, it would be good to check one's position in deepening it, in making it more relevant, in deepening, in making it more, what do you call, more impactful, more, what do you call, and in tune with the reality, with the prospect of doing a better job in addressing the afflictions. So it'd be good to utilize that. So that's almost like checking the scaffold every once in a while, making sure that none of them is kind of falling apart, and wherever one sees something kind of not in good shape, kind of attending to that, and then repairing it or making it much stronger like that. Because philosophical scaffold, of course, not everyone would be that inclined to work and develop that, but for whoever it is possible, it is something of a interest and some kind of a, what you call, benefit one sees in it. It would be a worthy thing to kind of explore and engage in, and that will go hand in hand with building one's own actual practice in bringing about a realization. Okay, so now that said, we'll now go back to where we were and use that as an example. Yeah, by the way, I was yesterday shared the actual sutta, Vajra Sutta, in the Pali collection by Venerable Sanjay Khandrola, and I'm very thankful for that. Usually when I come across suttas like this, then I look for them and study them, like I do, like I did with the Ratana Sutta and the other Kalama Sutta and other sutras. But this one, I just was looking up for an easy, ready translation of that stanza, and I ended up finding this first, and this must have been meant for, because this brings richness to the discussion that we are going to deal with. But first, I think, yeah, so yeah, not only that, the two stanzas that I shared, these are the two stanzas that I shared. Sorry. Okay, that's fine. I was trying to use annotation, but that's fine. The two stanzas that we share, they appear in the same order in that sutta also, among just three verses there. And yes, there is a marked difference in how the translations have turned out to be. But as I said earlier, even in the Tibetan text also, when they look for the source of this, they are pointing to I don't know if exactly Pali Sutta, but or a sutta in Pali, but it must be because it was a sutra by the name of Nyendela Dambedo, which means a sutra instructing the Shravakas. And then, yes, the import of this, of course, one can all understand, is found all over the Prajnaparamita Sutras, but there is a very close rendition of this, in prose, in the sutra called the Sutra of Father and Son Meeting. So anyway, first I will deal with this from the Sanskrit. Yes.
Making your screen bigger, please.
Can I? Oh, I see. Even bigger?
Yes, please.
Okay.
As you did. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, let me. Okay, so according to the Tibetan translation, not just Tibetan translation, but a rendition that is dwelled on in Chandrakirti's root text, Madhyamika Avatar. Even in the root text itself, it dwells on this particular sutra, and that too on these specific points that I will be pointing to, particularly the dependence part of it, the collection part of it, the dependence part of it, like that. So, okay, so now we will deal with this and then try to see a sign of maturity, at least at least from a Prasangika Madhyamika point of view. And then hopefully, even in the sense of reality. Of course, it may be a little difficult to accept all of those positions, but nonetheless, kind of either on the surface or in terms of its implications, one begin to sense, or maybe just wonder something in it, something in it in terms of its proximity to the reality, as well as proximity to the reality in terms of how things exist, but more particularly in how it has more impact on our effort in dealing with the afflictions. More particularly here, in this respect, we are talking of looking into the afflictions. Yes, I remember His Holiness the Dalai Lama sharing this. When we deal with this topic of no self, or the topic of no self, of course, within quotation marks, or talking about, in the same tune, talking about dealing with the grasping at selfhood. we are not talking of, say, particularly in the sense of grasping, we're not talking of something within us that we can all that easily identify as problematic, uh, let alone as being negative. So unlike emotions like extreme attachment, extreme obsession, anger, hatred, whatnot, self-grasping is not like that. It is not necessarily that painful unless we relate to that, unless we identify that at the more pronounced level of afflictions in the form of extreme hatred and whatnot. So it is not even considered negative by itself. Uh, it is a neutral, cognitive, yet problematic uh, component within us as sentient beings. So when sometimes people say, what is wrong with grasping? What is wrong with seeing things inherently existent? It's by seeing things inherently existent that I become enthused to do this and go for this and more encouraged to work this. Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Many of our virtues, many of our positive qualities, at least at our ordinary level, we have to invariably rely on self-grasping, invariably. I mean, most of the time, not necessarily all the time, not that all the time we are grasping at things in the inherent, in the sense of inherent existence, but very often we do that, and that includes even when we are in positive state of mind. Even our cultivation of love, compassion, could be done within this dimension, within this context of seeing the components, the parts playing into this as inherently existent. And that may be kind of adding to the support, at least at that point. Not that it has to rely totally on that, but at that point, that may be kind of giving a boost to that. And that's very true. So, but what its role is in the uh, what its role is in comparison with the problematic afflictions that we identify with, that we identify, such as hatred, uh, strong attachment, obsessive self-absorption, and likewise seeing things in a very, very, very negative uh, form, almost like a concrete, cut out, kind of objectively negative things, or being in a depressed mood, kind of really seeing the world falling on oneself, the world out there over which one has not the slightest say whatsoever, etc., etc. Those uh, we feel the pangs of them. We want to get rid of them. So, what is the relationship between them and the so-called self-grasping within us? By the way, the English term self-grasping, it's a direct translation of tagzin in Tibetan. Ta is self, zin is grasping, tagzin, self-grasping. But I mean, the word by itself is not enough, I think. It needs to be uncoded, it needs to be decoded, and needs to kind of really probe further than the surface term. Very often self-grasping to an uninformed person, it may seem like, oh, grasping at yourself, thinking, I, which is, of course, part of that, at least some flavor, some degree of it is part of that, but that's not the whole story. So anyway, to cut it short, when we are talking of self-grasping here, we are talking of self not as in person, but self as in identity that we can speak of just about everything. Everything has an identity. Everything is what it is, and thus it has its identity. But the problem is when we see that identity, we tend to bring in an added baggage within that, not seeing the identity as it is in reality, but in a more so-called exaggerated way, in a more fabricated way, in a more blown out way. Of course, the blowing out we could do in so many degrees, but deep down at the very core, at the very foundation, underlying of all of them is one particular way of exaggerating them. But we could exaggerate things to be permanent when they are not, as all promising when they are not, as unlimited in what they can provide when they are not, etc., etc., more pleasant than they are not, more unpleasant than they are not, whatnot. But then they, so those are all degrees of exaggeration that we bring in, and when we kind of hold on to them, then they have an impact on how we feel, how we relate to the situation, how we feel, what we experience, and what leads, what actions it leads us to, be that mental, verbal, physical, and then the ramification of it over time, over lifetimes even. So there are so many degrees of exaggeration, so-called elaboration, so-called fabulations, so-called exaggeration, fabrication. But at the core of all of them, or rather, yeah, one could say at the core of all of them, if one were to think in a concentric model, then at the very core of all of them, or if one were to think in terms of a structure, at the very foundation, at the very underlying foundation of all of them is this exaggeration amounting to ascribing, to be easy in using a term, ascribing an inherent existence, ascribing an intrinsic existence. But that too is not enough. The term itself is not enough. One has to kind of really, because even in conventional terms, conventional sense, we can speak of things being intrinsic in one way or the other, inherent with those qualities, whatnot, and that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with the term itself. But the connotation of intrinsic in this particular sense that we are saying lies at the very, very root of all of these elaborations amounts to ascribing a status of existence in things, of course, completely in an independent sense, but more so in an independent, more so in the sense that that it is seen as existing. It is seen as existing in a self-sustained way. Self-sustained here, kind of what do you call, taking away any role of a subjective agent in its existing in the way it does. In a way, in a sense, the role of the subjective agent at the prasangika madhyamika level has to be seen 100%, so that there's nothing, not even the slightest tinge of its identity, of its being what it is from its own side, but totally reliant, dependent on a subjective designating. I say on a, almost suggesting like there may be just one subjective agent that could be singled out, but that's also problematic. Even if we point our finger to the subjective agent itself, again, we would find ourselves in the same way that the subjective agents themselves are not, again, self-sustainingly existing. So, okay, anyway, so self-grasping here is grasping at something, being that, something having that identity of being a cup, book, whatever, in a self-sustaining way. In a self-sustaining way, which completely rules out the influence of a subjective agent in making it what it is, Whereas in reality, at least seen from the Prasangika Madhyamika point of view, is that the reliance on a subjective designating agent is total, 100%, which leaves not a slightest tinge of any intrinsicality from the thing itself. So that is the ultimate reality of dependent origination. In Tibetan, we call that tenjungi tekonani. Usually we just, for the sake of convenience, we easily just translate that as the ultimate reality of dependent origination. I don't think that's strong, the word expression, because it has been so much used and so much heard, to not necessarily carry the actual weight that it is conveying. At least I may be completely wrong in this, but that's what I feel. Tenjungi tekonani, when I say tenjungi tekonani, literally it translates as tenjungi of dependent origination. Tekonani, suchness, the suchness of the tenjung, the suchness of the ultimate reality, the suchness of the interdependence or dependent origination. Or sometimes people use it as the ultimate reality. But what it really conveys is, what does something being dependently originate ultimately boils down to, right? What does it ultimately boils down to? What does it ultimately, right? What does it ultimately boils down to? There's nothing beyond that. But what is the ultimate thing that it boils down to when you say something is dependently originated? Not just dependent, not just dependent, of course, but something, which means total reliance on a subjective agent for its existence, for its identity, with not the slightest inch or slightest tinge of any room for its being, any part of it being objectively real, objectively existing. So that's how we make the distinction between dependent origination and emptiness. I kind of sometimes, maybe I'm reading too much into the English word. Emptiness has that weight of tongba ni. Ni is just that, nothing more, just that, nothing but that. That's what it conveys. So things are just empty, nothing but empty, right? So empty of what? Of intrinsic existence. In what way? In such a way that there's not even the slightest tinge of it. So what does it leave us with? With nothing but subjective agent, fully in charge of of establishing it, of making it a reality, of making it functional in the way it is, and making it capable of being relied on, or making it capable of destroying things or improving things, whatever. All the functionality is totally reliant on the designating subjective act. So tongba yi means just empty. Or not, sometimes if you say just empty means, I don't know, but what I'm trying to convey is totally just that, nothing but that. So that's exactly the connotation being carried in the expression in Tibetan when we say tenjungi tekonani. So, and that also, tenjungi tekonani, the suchness, the ultimate thing that anything dependent originated boils down to, which is with not the slightest tinge of any objectivity, totally reliant, totally existing by mercy, at the mercy of a subjective agent. So that's what the Prasangika Madhyamikas push us to in terms of seeing the identity of things, seeing what things are. So here it is, in this particular stanza, it is presenting that in the case, in in the case of a person, by using chariot or a cart as an example. But then the different schools, their take, it's almost like looking at the same stanza and then let a child, an adolescent, a teenager, an adolescent, and an adult look at it, and then ask them, come up with what you see, what you make of it. Yes, they see the same stanza, but they some kind of overlook something, emphasize something, and based on that, they come up with something, of course, within the range of what is conveying, but not exactly the same. So based on that, let's now see. To make it convenient, I will for now just stick to this. Uh, Although the Tibetan term explicitly is not tak, which is for the designation, it is je, at least chitar yang la so nam la, then xing da xie je, either known or expressed, called. But for now, we're calling it designated and not adding anything more. So what is the take of the Vaibhashika? They say, yes, just as we see chariot is designated, of course, they may either see this or not, but they kind of gloss over it and see the collection here. More particularly, they pay attention here. Likewise, a person is conventionally designated in dependence upon the aggregates. So based on that, when they are asked, what is the person in your understanding? Or based on what Buddha says here. And they say a person is a collection of its aggregates, nothing but the collection of its aggregates. So what is the person? The collection of the aggregates. That's what they say. Right? The person is the collection of the aggregate. What about person being outside of the aggregate? No, that is a total no option, because Buddha has already set his philosophy within the bounds of no self, in terms of a person, in terms of anything. Nothing has a atma, right? Anatma. So within that, it has to stay within it. And within the anatma, within the non-self, then the person has to be the aggregates. And that too, the collection of it, because it is designated in dependence upon the aggregates. The individual aggregates cannot be the person, because they are what the person is, what you call dependently designated on. So it has to be the collection. And particularly, they see the collection here, and they say, yes, just as the chariot is the collection of its parts, likewise, the person is the collection of its aggregates. So they kind of point their finger in something within the aggregates, right? But into doing so, based on this, they say it is the collection. Of course, there are some other schools within the Vaibhashika and others, Vaibhashika and also, within Vaibhashika, who say it's the continuum of the aggregates, it is the collection of the aggregates, or it is one particular aggregates within that, the mind, like that. But for now, we'll take the stand, for the sake of clarity, we'll take the stand of the Vaibhashika as a whole, as saying the collection is the person. And now we ask Chittamatra, what is your take on this? And the Chittamatras, particularly the scripture, those who follow the scripture, they uphold 8 categories of mind, of which the last one is the what we call Alaya Vijnan, the foundation of all consciousness. The term foundation of all consciousness. Anyway, it is the Quincy. That's the eighth consciousness. So from within the aggregates, it is the consciousness. It is the consciousness, which is the person. Is saying that it is conventionally designated in dependence upon the aggregates. And within the aggregates, it will reason, saying because of uh, what is the term? Because of its particular preference in accepting an eighth consciousness, it's for many reasons, at least from its own level of reasoning and the sources in the scriptures, the concept of eighth consciousness is dear to the this subset of Chittamatra. Again, for the sake of convenience, so just coming up with 4 takes, we will take their stand as a whole for the Chittamatra. So they say it is from among the aggregates, not the mere collection, but from among the aggregates, it is the eighth consciousness, which is the person. So the person is the eighth consciousness. That is so if we were to ask who John is, we say John's the foundation of all consciousness, the eighth category of consciousness is ultimately the John. So they do not give up looking for a person within the aggregates. Their philosophical leaning to something that they can have a hold on, kind of pushes them at that level of their maturity to look for something within the aggregates. And the Vaibhashikas shows the collection of the aggregates, the Chittamatras, within the aggregates, not just the whole aggregate, but within the eighth consciousness. And they say that is the person. Now, if we ask, I think the previous position of the Vaibhashika, that is the common position of the Vaibhashika and the Sautantrika, and then this is the Chittamatra. Now we ask, for the sake of a big difference, we divide up Madhyamika into the 2, Prasangika, of which the final position we are trying to kind of measure this up with. Now there is this Sautantrika Madhyamika. If we ask them, they looking at this stanza, they would say, surely the person has to be found within the aggregates. Surely the person is something to do with the aggregates. Of course, it can be outside of it, because that would go against the fundamental, seal, philosophical seal in terms of the existence of person or not. But then they are not so totally mature enough, if you say philosophically, to say that the person is totally designated, without identifying it with any of its aggregates. So they would say it is again, not the eighth consciousness, but the mind consciousness, the sixth mental consciousness, but with a qualification. They say it is not as objectively identifiable with the sixth consciousness as the other schools did, because they objectively identify it with either the aggregates, the collection of the aggregates, or within that the eighth consciousness. But it would say it is partly objective in being the sixth consciousness, but partly by virtue of being designated as a person on it, that it becomes the person, not totally objective, no totally subjective, as Prasangika Madhyamika would have it. So the Prasangika Madhyamika would have to, whereas the Prasangika Madhyamika take is, the person is designated upon, designated, the person is neither the collection of parts, nor is it any one of the aggregates, nor is it partly aggregate, but partly due to being conventionally designated. But rather, it is merely, the person is not the aggregates, not the collection, right? Not the aggregates individually, not the collections, nor the sixth consciousness or the eighth consciousness. It is not at all the aggregate, but it is what it is by virtue of being designated in dependence upon the aggregate. So based on what it proposes, it critiques the position of the others. Based on this, let's now take this here. I'll push it a little bit, and then we will open for question and answer. So the Prasangika, at the most mature level, he reads each part of it, pays very close attention to this, and then says, what Buddha is suggesting is, the person is merely designated in dependence upon the collection of its parts. So, because that's what the example chariot has been presented as designated in dependence upon the collection of parts, which means it is not the collection. So the Vaibhashika's take, saying it is the aggregates, it is the collection, he says this has been already ruled out here in the example, which has to be applied here in the meaning. Because if it is designated in dependence upon the collection of its parts, then it should not be the parts. So if one is standing up in dependence upon a stick, one cannot be identified with the stick. So is the case with here, that it cannot be identified. The person is not the collection of its parts because it is independent upon it that it is being designated. And then it comes to the Chittamatra's position. Said, no, you cannot pick one of the aggregates and say this is the person. Because one, you are being selected, you are being impartial, because all the aggregates here, all the aggregates are what a person is designated upon, but you pick one of them and say that is the person. Besides, that cannot be the case because neither the aggregates nor any particular individual of it, nor even the collection of it can be the person, because it is in dependence upon the collections of the aggregates that the person has been designated. Designated, by the way, is that it exists in dependence upon the collection of the parts. And then in terms of the Sautantrika's position, saying partly it is objective, partly it is subjective, the Prasangika's critique is, since it is designated in dependence upon the collection, it should have nothing to do with the aggregates individually, nor with the collections in terms of being identifiable with, either partially or wholly, because it is designated upon. So that's how it critiques all of them in a fairly justified way, based on how Buddha kind of spells it out here. And its own position doesn't fall in the category, fall in the extreme of still holding on to something objective out there in the aggregates. So in this regard, I'm usually reminded of the Gestalt psychologist's expression: the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I have come to know that they use it slightly in a different context. They are looking at, of course, they are looking at individuals, looking into the identity of things, and more or less saying that the thing is more than its parts. And for that, the example they use is that of a that of what is that? The image of two face, right? The image of two face forming a shape of a vase, and what the two coming together presents as a whole is greater than greater even than the sum of the parts. But here, uh, but here, what it is conveying is in that same spirit, but conveying in the sense, conveying what it is conveying is that yes, each individual parts of the aggregates, including the collection of the parts, which is also included in the parts from a Buddhist perspective, they are all parts, and independence upon them, which kinds of not on them, but independence upon them, the person is designated. So person is not designated on any of them, including the collection, which is itself part of the whole, that is the person, but rather it is designated independence upon it. And, uh, and thus it makes this case of the person being merely designated. Of course, just as the Sautantrika Madhyamikas worried that if things were to be purely designated, then one could project a personhood on an animal and then say there is a person there. So they could not, what do you call, digest the whole complexity of upholding the Prasangika Madhyamika's position, saying that there has to be something intrinsic, otherwise uh, anything can go. So there has to be something in the basis of designation, which would make the designation valid in terms of designating that specific identity on them, not just about anything. Whereas the Sautantra, the Prasangika Madhyamikas make the case that do not have to be, and that they could completely uphold the conventionality of things, despite the fact that not an iota of any intrinsicality has to be there. Yet at the same time, the functionality can totally happen. So, so, so it is up to us to see whether we see sophistication in how they read this and what they come up to, what they come up with in terms of who a person is, what a person is. By the way, the very question of what the person is or who the person is, I have yet to find out whether it is the right way of asking the question, but somehow in Tibetan, what we are saying is, what you call person, what is that, right? What is that? Not who is the person? Because when I ask these, people come up with different answers. Maybe it is in the same spirit also, where they say, oh, the memory is the person, or something else is the person and whatnot. Maybe it is in the same spirit of trying to kind of really find something objective that they could identify with the person, but and that without that, they feel that they would not be able to sustain any kind of a rationality or sensibility in their position. But in the Prasangika Madhyamika, it is not to be the case. So by presenting it this way, one has to see, at least with this as an example, do we see a sophistication, a progressive degree of sophistication in what a person is. And then the main important thing is to then apply it into our own actual practice and then see whether this holds true, and whether they seem to have some connection with what underlies all of these afflictions. When we give rise to affliction, do we tend to kind of take for granted an objective identity in the first place, then based on that project on them, and then blow it up into some kind of a affliction that then grows further into some kind of action. So this is just an example here. So as I was saying, likewise we could apply the same thing in the other takes, more particularly in terms of very crucial position like what is ignorance, what is the root of samsara. There we can see lack of or a presence of sophistication that really matters, and how that affects the whole presentation of the uh, what you call the paradigm. Okay, this has gone a little further, but I had to uh, round it up. So maybe one question.
I guess you wanted to alternate and take a question from online today, right? So
Yeah.
I'll send one from the online audience. So it says, are Madhyamakas saying that identity is superimposed on the aggregates, but not merely a collection of the aggregates? Would the Madhyamakas say that the person is neither body or mind, basically another way of referencing the aggregates? Or would they say both? Can you talk about the fourfold analysis? So that question is in the answer Q&A box as well, if you want to read it.
Okay. Where is it?
If you click on Q&A at the bottom, and under, you should see it under answered.
Oh, okay. Yes. So our Madhyamika saying that identity is superimposed on the aggregates, but not merely a collection of the aggregates. Oh, okay. Let me take this step by step. So our Madhyamikas, one has to be very specific within the Madhyamika, because there's a big difference between the sub-schools within Madhyamika, the Prasankika Madhyamika and the Sautantrika Madhyamika. So when we consider the topmost, the most final position, that is the intent of the Buddha in terms of how things exist, we have to associate it with the Prasankika Madhyamikas. So let me understand this as asking for the Prasankika Madhyamikas, right? So are the Prasankika Madhyamikas saying that identity is superimposed on the aggregates? It is not superimposed. Let's say, let's take that it is superimposed, right? Superimposed. I think that should be fine, a term. It is superimposed not on the aggregates, neither on the collection of the aggregates. It is superimposed independence on the aggregates, independence upon the collections, independence upon the aggregates, individually, independence upon the collections of the aggregate, but not on them. Let me give you an example. Suppose we see someone from far. All we see is just the head. But right away we say, oh, Tashi is there. Where did we project Tashi? On his head? But we did project Tashi, but not on his head, but independence upon what we saw, which is his head. So is the case. If we were to see the whole body of the Tashi also and then project, even then also there would be parts. We will be only seeing the front facade, not the back, etc., etc. And likewise, at that time, the superimposition has been independence on what we saw, but not on that. So that dependence part, dependence on the collection of the That is very crucial from a Tibetan uh, uh, Buddhist Madhyamika understanding point of view, just as it is very clearly, what do you call, spelled out in the Chandrakirtis, not just commentaries, but root text itself and the commentaries also. So that one is done, right? So are the Prasangika Madhyamika saying that the identity is superimposed on the aggregates? Neither on the aggregates nor on the collection, but neither, I mean, irrespective of whether you use the term merely or not, if you say superimpose merely on, superimpose merely upon, none of this applies. None of this is agreeable. It is superimposed independence upon the aggregates, superimposed independence upon the collection of the aggregates, but not on them. Okay, now next one. Would they say that the person is neither body or mind? Basically, another way of referencing the aggregates. Yeah, the person is neither the mind nor the body, neither even mind-body. So this was very clear. The chariot is not its parts, not the collection, right? But it is superimposed independence upon the collection. Independence, it could also be applicable, it is superimposed independence upon the individual aggregates or on the collection, but not superimposed on them. So neither the body is the mind, the person, nor the mind, nor even the mind body is the person. So that expression of the Gestalt psychologist, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So the whole is neither the sum nor the parts, of course not, but not even the sum, which is the collection, but greater than that, right? I don't, yeah. So that's very helpful to kind of make a sense here. In this respect, everything is an emergent property, emergent thing, not its basic components, but emergent. So I think that is explained. Would they say both? No. Can you talk about the fourfold analysis? Oh, fourfold analysis is one of the reasonings in approaching the understanding of emptiness, just as dependent origination is. Likewise, there is another reasoning called uh, Chikdudel, neither one with nor other from. That's another reasoning. And then there's this one called fourfold analysis. Of course, a fourfold analysis can come in three different forms. But basically what it is this reasoning saying that it is neither this, nor both of them, nor neither of them, right? But this has to be understood not in a plain conventional sense. All of them is qualified in an ultimate sense. So it is saying something is something is. So in the case of a person, it will be like the person is neither the body intrinsically, neither one with the body, or no, neither the body intrinsically, nor different or separate from the body intrinsically, uh, right? Nor both, neither both, like that. So, but that analysis, as much as it is presented almost like in a very, almost like in a philosophical puzzle form, uh, in its true spirit. Kind of, if we approach that, if we approach that only in a plain conventional sense, that will land us nowhere. It's saying it's neither this nor different from this, neither both or nor both. It doesn't leave us with anywhere. It only sounds, yeah, it only sounds sophisticated enough, but that doesn't lead us to anywhere. So anyway, what I was saying was, when we speak of the fourfold analysis, or the analysis in terms of one with or different from Chikdudel, we do all of those reasonings are pursued in the spirit of intrinsic existence. It is neither intrinsically this no intrinsically different from this, no intrinsically both, one and the separate, no intrinsically neither. So in all of this, the qualification of intrinsicality is essential. I think I answered it to the best of my ability. So what do we do? What do you suggest? Another question, or should we proceed with? I think it is already time.
Yeah, we can dedicate and we'll send all the questions to the afternoon reviewer.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. Yeah, yes.